Buying a camera is not a cheap endeavor. Whether you are buying your first camera or maybe you are upgrading, it takes a ton of research, whether that's reading reviews, watching YouTube videos, or even maybe getting your hands on a camera. In my career as a videographer for over 10 years, I've had the chance to use a ton of cameras like the Sony a7 III, the Sony a7 IV, the Sony a7S III, the Canon R5, R6, R5C, and for a lot of my career, I was using cinema level cameras in the Canon C200. But as I moved out onto my own, no longer working for the company that I used to, I had to pick a camera that was the best bang for buck, essentially, that I could still create high quality content but not spend too much money. After all of my research, I didn't land on one of those big brands, but I landed on a beautiful niche brand called Lumix. I stumbled across a channel by a guy named Josh Cameron who does a ton of videos on the Lumix cameras. In this video, I'm actually going to be having a conversation with Josh Cameron, who is now a good friend of mine. We've got to meet in person, and we're gonna have a conversation about the Lumix cameras, why we got into them, what we love about them, and also a few things that could be better about them, because there's no perfect camera. Grab a cup of coffee or a beer, depending on what time of day it is, and enjoy. Dude, so I wanted to chat with you because you are one of the reasons why I actually got into the Lumix camera brand in the first place. And then because of that, we've actually been able to physically meet, which is incredible.
Yeah, man, it's honestly crazy. And of course, we got to meet for the first time in LA, but like I'd been watching your videos for a while beforehand. In fact, I think the first ever car shoot I did was for Mitsubishi, and I actually watched a couple of your videos before that. So it's cool to see how two little worlds, little corners and niches can collide, and then this can happen. So yeah, it's awesome, man. I appreciate you.
That's so crazy. What a wild world we live in, to like be able to catch up on YouTube and teach each other the things we need to know, and then meet in person, and now be able to create videos together. It's crazy. So I want to hear a little bit about your journey to Lumix as well. Not to like convince anyone that they should be on Lumix, but we both found our way there as professional videographers, and I think that there's a few reasons why, as opposed to some of these other bigger camera brands. So firstly, like, tell me what kind of content you create typically, and then essentially like what led you to the Lumix camera brand.
Yeah, okay, so I of course also do the YouTube videos primarily based on Lumix cameras, so more on how to set them up properly, more of their strengths, comparing them to other brands, and sort of talking more about the value factor and all that sort of stuff, as well as of course the developments in the L mount and all that sort of thing. And then my actual day-to-day work is I have my own sort of company doing video production for corporate businesses. So essentially I normally work with companies that have a turnover of anywhere between £15 million to about £500 million. So wow. I work with, you know, quite a nice range of companies that have sometimes very nice marketing budgets to do some really interesting things, but mainly in corporate sectors. So it's not like you'll be seeing it anytime on primetime telly. Right. You know? So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what cameras were you using before you got into Lumix, and then like what got you into the jump?
Okay, so I was using the Sony APS-C lineup of cameras. So that was the nice. A6300, the A6400, and the A6500 for a little bit as well. The reason why I moved over is because as the work started getting bigger, I realized that I can't be working with these sort of, you know, hobbyists trying to break into the advanced market sort of cameras. Like, I mean, it's a crop sensor camera. They were only 8-bit, not 10-bit. They had their limitations, you know, so I knew I had to upgrade and move somewhere else at some point. And I was looking at Sony's offerings at the time, and at that point, they didn't have a full frame camera that was 10-bit. This was during the times of the A7 Mark III. So that was still 8-bit, you know, it wasn't 10-bit at that point. Yeah. So I was looking at other offerings, and then there was Panasonic, and I knew that the, you know, GH5 was a cult classic camera. Everyone raved about it, and I'd actually never touched a Panasonic camera until the Panasonic S5, which is really funny because a lot of because a lot of people have this really long-standing history and brand loyalty and stuff, and I just didn't have that because I'd only used the full frame stuff. But the thing is I picked out that particular camera because it was full frame, it recorded 4K 10-bit, f422, which is exactly what I needed. It had a Vlog, which I'd heard was a really good log profile, and I hated SLOG because, of course, I was working with 8-bit, so it just fell apart. It never looked good.
SLOG is so hard to like manipulate
so
get into
hard,
like
man. Yeah.
Like I only ever used Cine 4 when I was in the Sony lineup of cameras because it was, you got a little bit of depth of color, like a little bit of a flatter profile, but like SLOG was such a hard one to color grade. And even now when I use any Sony cameras like the A7 S3 for example, I actually use the Lumix LUT to bring it back to life. And it's like, because the Sony A7 S3 and the Lumix both have like 14, Lumix represents it as 14 plus stops of dynamic range, and Sony reps it as like just shy of 15. So like they're both in the exact same range of dynamic range. And I moved over from the Canon R6, and the log profile on there is good, but I was shooting with like really backlit images a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so the high dynamic range in the highlights of the Lumix is what actually sold me on it, because I came into the S5 as well.
That's so interesting.
And so shooting against windows, you were able to expose much higher, so you could bring like your skin tones out better, and then in post get those highlights back from the Vlog in a way that you can't do with Canon for sure. And Sony, I mean, they do a really great job with how much dynamic range they have, but it was just really cool to see how great the Lumix compared and at a much better price point.
I think it's crazy though that you actually noticed that the most, because it's like everyone has their draw to a specific thing, right? And it's so interesting because you found a limitation with what you were using, and then you notice another brand did that one particular thing that much better, and just something as small as that is enough to shift your opinion completely, you know? That's really cool. That's really cool. I didn't know that.
The color science, man, on the Lumix is gorgeous. Like compared to Sony's, which is incredibly difficult, Canon has their look, and then a lot of people are drawn to like that look in particular. But the Lumix, to me, as a cinematographer, someone that has also grown up doing corporate work and documentary style stuff, like the Lumix profile is mind-blowingly good. And you kind of don't get it until you use it. And because it is more of a niche kind of market, I guess, for the Panasonic people, once you see it, you love it, and then that's why we all rave about it when we're actually in the brand, and people are like, I don't get it. But
it's just so natural. Like for me, if I was to shoot something side by side with, actually I did, I compared the A7 IV with the S5 Mark II. And I shot two scenes side by side, and I looked at each image and I was like, the Panasonic image looks more true to life, those colors are the most accurate, the skin tones look fine, all that sort of stuff. And while I did like the Sony look, because it did have, now they've made their sort of, you know, hallmark color palette a little bit more muted and cinematic because of the way that they know people want to use the camera, sort of thing. So it definitely has that sort of look as soon as you convert it to Rexler 09, of course.
I rented the camera before I actually purchased it because I wanted to get a feel for it. I didn't want to like jump in with both feet. Vlog was the one thing that I was really, really drawn to. And then actually like the ergonomics of the camera, like how it actually felt in my hand and how the buttons were laid out, were so intuitive to like change the white balance, change the ISO, whereas some of these other cameras, you have to set them up in a way that it's like, well, you can set them up, but to me, like Lumix was just ergonomically felt like home. Like, did you have any of that with your experience as well?
Yeah, I was coming from the Sony APS-C cameras, and they weren't really the most ergonomic cameras in the world. Right. Like they were tiny, the grip was really small, like the back buttons had like zero travel sort of thing. So realistically, any camera I held after those cameras would have felt nice. But I must say, I did feel like this almost immediate sort of like, of course, this is so intuitive, that makes total sense. Like as soon as I picked up the S5, that's what I had. I was like, of course that button will be there. Why wouldn't it be there? That's the most appropriate place to put that button, and this is the most appropriate way to put everything in the menu, you know, like it just made sense to me. One thing I actually remember loving about the S5 and about all of the Lumix cameras, you know, literally all of them pretty much, is the white balance, ISO, and then exposure compensation buttons here.
Yes.
Because you can hot swap these, you can custom map them, and they are such great buttons to have just to be able to hit on the fly, you know. So like I really like that. That was like the first thing that I was like, that's actually really nice, you know.
I turn these buttons into like some of the more professional, again, in such a cost-effective camera body, I was able to get waveforms out of it, which is like something that you get out of like professional cameras. So like I've dialed my exposure compensation button to be waveforms. So like whenever I'm filming something, I can check where my highlights exposure is and all that stuff. It's an absolutely genius camera that people just like haven't yet.
Yeah.
I think people are starting to hop on the bandwagon. They're starting to see that these cameras are like insanely capable and still at such a low price point.
Yeah.
Maybe not like so low. It's still expensive to get into a camera body, but the lenses
But comparatively,
too, I think, are coming a long way.
Yeah, but I mean, like, comparatively speaking, just sort of go on what you were saying, comparatively speaking, to get into a full-frame camera that can shoot 6K open gate and 4K 10-bit 422, and it has Vlog, and it has up to 14 plus stops of dynamic range, whatever plus means. Like, all of these sort of specs you get, sometimes, I mean, like the S5ii records ProRes up to 5.9K externally. You know, you can shoot ProRes 4444 no 422
but
HQ.
you get up to raw,
That's the
right?
highest.
Like it's
yeah so you have all of that sort of stuff, and then you think, okay, fine, that's going to cost at least £3,500, right? Because that's a juicy spec. And it's like, oh no, you can pick one up for like, I don't know, like £2,000, or even now in England, there's so many great sales on now. You can pick up the camera with a kit lens and a 50mm for £2,000.
I just watched one of your videos of the Lumix versus like the Canon and the RF lenses and the Sonys and all their lenses. And it was super intriguing to see, like, a big stopgap, I think, for people is that you get into an ecosystem and you now have all these lenses that you've already paid for. So like Sony, you're getting into all these like G Master lenses that are like $2,500 on their own. Why would you ever jump over to a Lumix?
Yeah.
But for me, my comparison was you could buy for the same price as a Sony A7S3 body, you can get an S5 II, 2 lenses, and like a Ronin gimbal for the exact same price as the body of the A7S3. So and they're more cost-effective lenses, but they are still like professional level. Like all these ones, I've got the 35mm, the 85mm, and the new 100mm.
Yeah.
People are like, well, they're cheap. They're not cheap. Like they're professional level, like insanely well-enginered lenses that work on everything we do.
Totally
Go ahead.
Agree. I totally agree. No, I'm just so happy to hear someone else singing their praises for these lenses, because I feel like it's not spoken about enough. Everyone goes, oh, finally, Lumix are, you know, making some somewhat affordable 1.8 primes that everyone can get into. But it's like, no, they've created 1.8 primes that all are the same form factor. They weigh relatively the same, so they're easy to balance on gimbals. They've done that with a macro lens now, which is crazy. All of this, and they have zero focus breathing, which is fantastic. The autofocus is super quick. They're super lightweight. Like, it's a perfect lens. There's no other hybrid lens that does photo and video as well as these lenses do, and I'll happily put my money where my mouth is with that statement, because they are genuinely amazing. So
people's gripes are like they don't go down to 1.4 or like have a 1.2 like some of like the Sonys or Canons might have in their, you know, pro level lenses, but you don't need it. Like 1.8 is an absolutely beautiful depth of field. If you need that extra stop of light, the beauty is you get dual native ISO. So if you need more light, just stop up to the 4000 ISO mark, you get a clean image again, and you're off to the races. So
and also like a f1.2, what's in focus? Like what? Like like a single strand of hair. It's like, come on, mate. Like we need a bit more than that.
Totally. So one other thing I wanted to talk about was how we actually met, which was at the Lumix event in Ojai, California, because we actually got to hear about, before anyone else did, about the production of the new 100mm 2.8 macro lens, which we got to actually like hear the intense and in-depth engineering of how they made this lens happen. Which did you make a video on this yet on your YouTube that we could link up? I haven't made one, but I mean, I've made a video. It was published on the embargo day, so I've got a video out on it. But no, it's crazy, because a lot of people don't understand how much of an engineering sort of feat this is. Like being able to
make a macro lens that's a 1:1 magnification ratio. You know, that has super quick autofocus, and that is this size. They've got so many more advancements in certain areas that maybe other brands aren't necessarily thinking about, and they're now putting it into this newer phase tech technology and just going, well, yeah, we've one-upped everyone now, you know?
Yeah.
Which is so cool. I love it.
Yeah. The other thing is the community that I love with Lumix is that they bring in creators from all different places, and they're not just big creators, they're people of all different sizes of followers. Like, you and I aren't the hugest creators on the platform either,
No.
but we're people that have become passionate.
I mean, you're huger than me.
I mean, but neither of us are huge. We're just love what we do, and we're just making our way and whatever. And I think like we got to meet everyone in California. They're creators at different levels, but in different genres of photography or videography. And they bring us all to like this place and actually asked us for our feedback, which was absolutely incredible to like be a part of that Lumix community. I'm a huge fan of how they bring and incorporate actual users, not just big $100,000 people. I mean, I like being a low-level creator and them actually valuing our opinion on, hey, we're coming out with this, but what are we missing? We actually had those conversations, which was pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think Lumix is such a like a responsive brand in that sense, in the sense that people, you know, for the longest time have complained about like certain things, like, oh, the autofocus, for example, and it took them so long to get to it, and there was that whole sort of finally thing. But what they don't realize is that there's little things, that like little improvements that they're making along the way every single time, and that's built them up to the point where literally all they had to do was fix the autofocus. That was the only thing, and then once they'd done that, they had made possibly one of the best cameras of this time. I mean, arguably, for the price point it's at and for what it can do, there's nothing that really compares to it, really, you know, on the market. I mean, I think the A7 IV is probably the closest comparison, but that's a more expensive camera, and there's other things, you know, but we won't get too deep into that. They're really responsive. They know what the market wants, and they're also very, very humble, you know, like the whole brand is very humble about what they do. There's no sort of like, you should be, you know, like you should be bowing down to us, we know better than you sort of thing. They're very, you know, very cool, very level-headed, and they want to know how they can improve. And they also have this infectious passion about what they do as well, you know.
They actually care about their community and getting people into a creative community. I've never experienced that with any of the other brands. The other thing I wanted to talk about on my end of why I love it is because of the hybrid capabilities. No one talks about really the photo capabilities of Lumix, because their video capabilities are now bonkers. Like, I freaking love everything about the video side of it. But the photos, I came from a Sony A7 III, and the dynamic range in the photography was phenomenal. Like, really, really hard to beat in their raw capabilities. So again, when I rented the S5 and started taking photos with it as a car photographer, the same dynamic range was in that camera in the low lights, but now I also had that incredible highlight retention that I don't think the Sony had either. So, man, no one's talking about how good these well, not no one. A lot of our Lumix buddies are talking about it, but like, people need to be talking about how incredible these cameras are. So,
don't you just think also that like there's this depth to the raw files on the Panasonic? Like I know that Sony has the .arw file, that's their sort of, you know, raw thing or whatever. And I've looked at their, you know, well, I've played with them because I've used to use Sony, you know, like I've played with Sony raw files, and like they're great, don't get me wrong, but like I feel like the Panasonic files just feel a bit richer to me. Almost like, I know everyone like always, you know, slams on this brand, but you know, like Nikon. Of course you know Nikon, but yeah.
I know the brand. I don't use them, but yeah, I know.
I mean, of course, everyone knows Nikon. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like the brand gets a hard rep because realistically speaking, if you look at a Nikon, like photo taken with a Nikon camera, you always go, damn, that's a nice image. And I feel like Panasonic has not got, you know, all of that sort of juiciness that Nikon does have, and I'll, you know, sort of bow my hat down to them because they do have that, but they do have a lot of the sort of character of that, you know, like the sort of richness, the punchiness, and I don't think other brands get that. They're very, for me at least, two-dimensional, if you know what I mean. So yeah.
I find the Sonys to be like a very digital look. You can get a lot out of the picture, which is great. Canon has like their their warmth look. I don't know, like their lifestyle presence. I don't even know how to like define the Canon look.
Magenta tones,
Yeah. And then, for me, you kind of nailed it. Like, Lumix is just kind of rich. Like, it just has all the character that you want from that photo, and then of all the depth that you'd need to like kind of push it around to get the look that you would want. So
one thing I will say though, because I'm very aware that I don't want this entire chat to become just a massive I love Lumix fest. So I'm going to say one thing that I dislike about the Panasonic S5 II and 2X in terms of their raw files and the color rendition is, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the greens are too saturated. Like, I feel like I need to dial back my greens in editing every single time. That's one thing that I don't like about the the most current sort of color science, if you like.
Right.
But hey, I'm saying that as a sort of minor nitpick. It's just because, again, I want to show the world that I'm not just this completely biased person, that actually I do understand where there are shortcomings, So
if we're gonna kind of like end the conversation on a few like negatives, just to like round out the conversation kind of, the one thing they're missing, and I think that we all are dreaming for, is that full frame slow motion, which we can get full frame 1080p slow motion, but we still kind of get that crop in that 60 frame, which honestly is not the end of the world if you're just using the right lenses. But that's my only gripe, is I'm just waiting for that kind of like full frame 4K 60. Once we have that, the Lumix camera will have quite literally everything that a professional photographer or videographer could need, right? Like, what more do you want?
I mean, I agree with you on that one, but I've got one that's even bigger than that for me, though. So my thing is, and again, I don't know whether whether we're going to delve too deeply into all this stuff, because then it becomes a 2-hour thing. It's like, and this sucks, and that sucks. And it's like, well, we got the wrong way. Let's back it up. For me, honestly speaking, though, one thing that I do notice is so, of course, to preface, Lumix is a fantastic brand in the sense that they have really tried to open up the world of anamorphic shooting, because you've got all the D-squeeze ratios in the body, so you can like all the monitoring, the stabilization, all that sort of stuff that they've engineered for this particular type of shooting is fantastic. It's really advanced, and it's really cool that they're doing that. That being said, the rolling shutter performance of their cameras is nowhere near fast enough to keep up with anamorphic shooting, because naturally rolling shutter is accentuated when you're shooting anamorphic because of the D-squeeze. So I feel like they've sort of lost the mark a little bit, in the sense that anamorphic shooting handheld with the cameras is very hard to do because of that rolling shutter, especially at the more closer focal lengths. So my biggest thing is, give me the exact same camera as this with a 4K 60 no crop and a rolling shutter performance of at least, 12 milliseconds, and then I'm done. That's all that's all I need.
Wasn't global shutter just put out in one of the later Sony cameras? Like,
it was.
You'd never get. So I mean, the technology's out there now. It's just a matter of slowly integrating that, whether it's in the next year, 2, 3 years. But I mean, like, the perfect camera will be here in the next year or 2 or 3. I don't know. Lumix, if you're listening, please, full frame 60 would be great.
But I mean, it's crazy how fast things move, and like people will have the perfect camera at some point, and then, as tradition always shows us, it goes full circle. So we have a perfect digital image now that looks fantastic. What do we want to do? Let's add some grain. Let's add some noise. Let's make this look a little bit like a lens blur.
Well, because people we're all putting naturally mist filters on it.
Exactly.
I think, what did you call yourself? Like, mist boy?
I'm an edgy mist boy.
Funny. And I've got one on my camera right now, but because we're all just putting these filters to make it look less digital, anyways. But
I mean, it's crazy as well, because I feel like people's one of the biggest complaints actually from the S5 II and 2X sort of generation to the OG S5 generation is that the phase detect sensor now looks a bit too sharp, and people are complaining about that. So you can't win. But then again, there's been this lengthy sort of almost saga with Lumix sort of saying we don't want to add phase detect because there's a degradation in image quality, like it won't look as good as contrast does. And then they're like, well, we've done it. And now people are like, oh, it doesn't look the same as before. And it's like, well, they told you. Like, what did you expect, you know?
I'm glad we hopped on this call. I just want to thank you for all the work you do. Obviously, you work as a full-time content creator that needs to pay the bills and put a roof over your head and for your now soon-to-be wife. But yet you also still take the time to create YouTube content for people like me and people like my community that want to get educated on what are the best cameras and what should we be looking for. So I'm so stoked, man. Thanks for being just a wicked guy. I enjoyed spending time with you so much in California. We get on and I enjoy our friendship.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to make sure that you got your proper thank you for taking that. No one's paying you to hop on YouTube and educate us, right? Like that's all just you in your free time. So thanks, dude. Like I'm stoked to be in the Lumix, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, but I must say, I was just a guy in a lucky place with that, because when I was getting the S5, there was no one else making videos about it. So I naturally found a little market in the YouTube game that wasn't necessarily being filled, especially by someone in the UK. So I was like, okay, sweet. Well, now I'm going to be the UK Lumix S5 guy. And I sort of stamped that, and I was like, this is now my space.
I love it. I wouldn't be here without you, man.
Yeah.
You know? So I'm now loving the Lumix brand, hanging out with the Lumix people, and like you, we'll pin all your videos. But like making money with Lumix is awesome. So just grateful for you, man, and thank you for taking the time in your evening, because it's my morning and all this stuff. But I just appreciate you, and thank you so much for hopping on this call. And I hope that the people watching have found value in our Lumix fanboy session. So
yeah, exactly. With like 2 minor negatives, just to sort of make it more even.
Well-rounded,
yeah, exactly.
If you guys enjoyed this type of content, you want to learn more about the Lumix products, Josh does a ton of videos on that. I love shooting automotive content, and I use Lumix cameras, and you might like this video here. See you in the next one.